Well, good afternoon, FS Club members, and welcome to an FS Club webinar this afternoon in London. The title of today's event is Tuttles All the Way Down, Digital Plumbing Upgrades Essential for Financial Services to Progress. And we have as our guest today, Dr. Lita Glyptis, who's the Chief Client Officer at 10 Times Banking, which of course is a very, very interesting new initiative with Anthony Jenkins. Now, you know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and it really is a privilege to be able to introduce so many of these fascinating webinars. And I can only do so because our sponsors, arranged here before you, are wonderfully tolerant and allow us to range widely and freely across all sorts of areas to do with technology, economics, and finance. And Lita will be talking about the breadth of the global infrastructure that needs to change to support many of the improvements that we all seek in the way in which financial services supports us and our economies. I'm not going to try and explain today's title, but I will try and explain today's agenda. So my job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible. I will leave Lita to explain the title, which has an interesting background. You got her bio, CV, and even an explanation of the title when you registered and when you signed up. So I won't repeat that. But I might say just a few quick obvious answers. Firstly, yes, the slides are up and you'll see them. Secondly, the presentation will go up in approximately 48 hours. And finally, we will send all of the Q&A to Lita so she can get back in touch with you. To have that question and answers, please use the GoToWebinar facility for sending questions through to me, and I will introduce them into the conversation. No point in emailing me or texting me or WhatsApping me or signaling me. I'm here with you. So please use that facility, and all of those questions and comments will be sent to Lita with your email so she can get back in touch with you if you wish for any purpose. And so with no more ado, Lita, the floor is very much yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for so many of you being here. As Michael said, there is quite a lot of material I want to go through today. I will be sort of bombarding you with some of this content. And my hope is that as we go through all of this, you will jot down questions, jot down thoughts. I will not dwell on quite a lot of the content I present here. I just want to guide you through some ideas, but I'm happy to share it. I'm happy to delve into it. I'm happy to go through the detail with you later. But let me start with our title, as Michael said. Sorry, this doesn't like me right now. There we go. The idea behind the title for this piece came from the mythology of, the origin of the world. When people start thinking about digitizing their infrastructure, digitizing their businesses, if we take our minds back to when this journey started for most banks, it was a pretty existential question. It was a case of, well, how big is this, and how deep does it need to go? Does it transform our entire world, or does it change a little bit of it? And the realization over the past 15 years is that it actually touches every part of the world. So very often when we talk about digital transformation, we say it's like that myth that the universe rests on the back of a few elephants resting on the back of a giant turtle floating through space. And that's complicated enough to wrap your head around. But what happens after the turtle? What happens under the turtle? Well, it's turtles all the way down. And turtles all the way down has been a standing joke for digital transformation, that actually every step of the way as we're trying to transform, we're finding that there's another layer and another layer and another layer, and the journey is never ending. But as you notice, this piece is not called Turtles All the Way Down. It's called Tuttles All the Way Down. And the reason we call it that is twofold. One is that the whole idea of Turtles All the Way Down is cute and it's funny, but it presents us as practitioners with a philosophical problem. And let's face it, philosophical problems are not the kinds of problems we want to be solving when we've got banks to run and work to transform. If this is a never-ending piece of work, a transformation effort with no end, then how on earth do we even go about doing the work? And our answer is, it's not infinite, although it's pretty deep. And it goes deeper than the experience layer. It goes deeper than the type of innovation experiments we've hoped would be enough. It goes into the plumbing on which our banking infrastructure runs. And plumbing is what we're going to talk about. And the title is a reference to a film that may have been filmed before some of the people in our audience were born, which makes me feel very, very elderly. But it does feature a rogue engineer who believes in plumbing and wants to fix those problems meaningfully. And that's something I want to come back to, because part of the message, I guess, I want to start with is that we've been doing digital transformation for 15 years almost, and we've kind of been doing it wrong. So let's go back to how banking comes into Tuttles and plumbing. The starting point that I want us to play with for a moment is that before the digital journey began for banks, there was a period of considerable stability before. And particularly when I started my career, when I actually first met Michael about 20 years ago, banks had a set identity, a gravitas that pretty much said, we are who we are. It has taken us a long time to get here. We're in control of our destinies. We're important people in grey suits. And we manage your granny's pension. We manage money that goes into global infrastructure. We have responsibility. We need to take things seriously. The regulator wants us to take things seriously. And although we see things changing, we are in control of the narrative. The future is coming, but it's coming to us, and we will make decisions. And if you think back to the last decade and a half of transformation, most of the conversations in the first half of that period were about banks making choices, feeling absolutely in control of how far, how fast, and how deep digital transformation would go. There was definitely a discussion around the concerns of disintermediation, but mostly it was about the choices we were going to make, the education we wanted to get for ourselves, and the things we would potentially choose to leave on the table. And then fintech happened. And by that, I mean a period of lasting and profound change. It is a completely arbitrary timeline. I have seen timelines that choose different events to signal the beginning of that transformation. But the duration of it, the length of it is a matter of great agreement and consensus. It has been about 15 years of this conversation of transformation being ever present, change being the new normal, and the starting point of a bank being in control as this future is coming down the path has proven itself to not be entirely true. And Tuttle's come back into this now because as the realization that this fintech thing, this transformation thing, this digital thing was coming at us at a speed that meant we weren't as much in control of it as we had initially thought. We weren't in a position to ingest it the way we originally thought. Banking tried to cut it down to size, and every bank in the world tried to say, okay, this is new, this is big, but we've done this before. Let's figure out the piece of it that is most important. Let's find the turtle in this sea of turtles that is enough. So what started as a sort of set of conversations in the boardroom became a bit of a cottage industry. Analysis of who's spending what, hoping that holds the answer. That didn't. Analysis of who's disrupting what. If we cut the work we do in different segments, will we find who disintermediates us, who disrupts our world? Will that find us the silver bullet? That didn't work so much. Is geography the answer? If we spend time and money figuring out where these things happen, will we get the answer to where we need to focus? The one thing we need to do in a sea of many. The predictions year on year have been getting vaguer, and as I'm sure you've realized, scarier, looking at bigger and wider and ever more complex situations. We started paying quite a lot of money for these reports, hoping that we will get the answer. And increasingly, the answer we're getting is everything. Do all the stuff. This is one of my favorite management trend reports from 2019 that pretty much says, do all of it. So before I go on to the next question, I'd love to do a little poll of the people we have in the room with us. You all have to make decisions. So when it comes to navigating disruption over the last 15 years, you've had a taste of influencers and pundits telling you what's important, what comes next, fintech entrepreneurs, analysts and academics, and each other. A quick poll, who do you trust? Michael, do you want to jump in?
Hi, leader. We're just up to over 60%. I'm just going to give the audience a few more seconds and then we'll close the poll.
Great.
Yeah, we're up to 80% now, Lida. The
Nice.
results are coming back. Well, it's a tightly bound community. We trust each other.
I was hoping that would be the answer. Fantastic. Well, if we go back to this and say, who do you trust? Each other. Well, so do the people who are selling us reports. This is one of my absolute favorite slides, showing that the vast majority of this little cottage industry of guesswork actually is exactly that. It is guesswork. And a lot of the highly respected studies are essentially people coming to decision makers, such as yourselves, asking us the questions that we're trying to figure out the answers to, repackaging them and passing them back to us. In other words, this is a Deloitte 11 years of research. If this doesn't give you a bit of a Star Wars feel and a bit of a headache, I don't know what would. But what we're seeing is that in 15 years of observing the trends, we have achieved two things. We have discovered that there is no silver bullet, and if anyone has the answer, it is not outside our offices and our industry. And the second is that we actually wasted precious time trying to answer a question that doesn't actually have an answer, because all we discovered is that it is Tuttles all the way down after all. All the things are happening all at once. So how does that help us? And where do plumbers come into this? The main thing that we discovered as an industry in the last 15 years is that knowing that a conversation is important is not the same as knowing what to do with it. I remember speaking, in fact, Michael was in the room about 10 years ago to a decision maker in the organization I worked in at the time. That person saying, do I need to learn it before I retire? And that was one of the most telling conversations I have had in my career, because understanding something is important isn't the same as knowing where to plug it in and what to do with it for your business. If we look back almost an equal, in fact, exactly an equal period of time, we'll see a whole host of capabilities that didn't exist then, which teaches us two things. One, guesswork is entirely pointless because none of us could have guessed those things were coming. And even if we had been able to guess them, it wouldn't be the same as knowing how to transform our organization. So after 15 years of playing at this game, what we're left with is, so what? And I have a few takeaways I want to share with you for your reactions. The first one is that we've been answering the wrong exam question. We've been looking at digital transformation in terms of creativity and innovation. And what we learned in 15 years is that all of this stuff is absolutely real, absolutely scalable, and actually very, very exciting, but none of it is light touch. None of the new technology we've looked at has a single easy to implement answer. Everything comes with new business models, robust infrastructure, and business imperatives. Looking at an avalanche of change, the only way to decide what's important is not by looking at what works somewhere else, but actually at having some hard conversations about your business and what needs to happen within your organization and in what sequence. So if we reset the exam question and think about what we've learned over the last 15 years in terms not of innovation and creativity, but survival, in terms of what each business and our industry as a whole needs to do in order to continue living or existing in a time of great transformation, we will probably start seeing completely different trends, especially if we look back. I would say that one of the biggest realizations of the last 15 years is that we absolutely are who we are. That was true. The starting point of the profitability structures, organizational structures, relationships, technology that we have is our starting point. It is not necessarily a justification for choices made or not made, but it is an inevitable starting point. We have to work with what we have. but we have to make choices, and we have to make choices within a framework that is not as much in our control as we thought. What the last 15 years have taught us is that the party can happen without us. And by us, I mean us as decision makers inside the financial services industry, whatever the organization we represent. If we have learned one thing in the last 15 years, it is that this is not a world that will wait for approval and buy-in from the banks. What does that mean if we unpack it? In the last 15 years, as the financial services world globally was busy at looking at what is changing and where to place their bets, the three biggest changes happened outside the doors of our organizations. The biggest change in my book, and one of my favorites, truth be told, is that the regulator has changed globally. The regulator has changed fundamentally, both in how they regulate and what they regulate. For a very long time, the regulator will never permit it was the door that shut in the face of most new ideas. And yet we're facing with a regulator in most geographies, definitely in the UK, definitely in Europe, but also in quite a lot of areas in APAC, that says, I will look at what is possible and I will advise what is desirable on the back of it. And that conversation is nowhere near as static and nowhere near as slow as it used to be. The second thing that has changed is the market. The competition is very similar still, particularly for those who do traditional banking, traditional FI, even those who don't do traditional banking. I would suggest that the competitors inside, sorry about that, it can go away now. The competitors that are the sort of newcomers into our space, particularly retail banking and sort of traditional transactional relationships, have very similar business models. And yet the market is changing because our customers, institutional and individual, are consuming digital services in other parts of their life that are extremely high value, and they're teaching them to want more, which means that the customer and the regulator are creating a possibility for an openness to the market that is absolutely not in our control the way it used to be. So what does that mean? It means that the last 15 years we've spent as an industry pretty much learning what is possible in the hope that one bit of it would emerge as the answer. That has not happened, but the learnings of what we have actually ingested in the last 15 years are super useful, because the era that we're now very much in requires a very different approach to technology to deliver the how of your business. Sorry about that. But neither the technology nor the landscape scanning will answer the question of what should we do. Technology in itself sadly never had that answer, and looking at what everyone else is doing and where the biggest disruption has not yielded the answer. Sadly, the hardest and most valuable question of what should I do with all these new capabilities has to absolutely be conversation driven within our organizations. What the last 15 years have absolutely also taught us is that waiting and seeing what will work is a choice that has been made by many, but it is not a strategy. Thankfully, for a lot of the people who have waited in the hope that an answer will become apparent, that was a strategy many opted for. So there are very few organizations that are truly ahead of the curve. Unluckily, it has translated to a lot of time and energy wasted for the industry. My message is that the era of optionality that has defined the last 15 years absolutely needs to end. And by looking at the choices you as an organization, all of us need to make, you have to answer the what and the how, right? What am I doing from a strategy perspective, and how am I doing it from a technology perspective? And this is where your plumbers come in. I promised you that both the Tuttles and the plumbers would come in, and here they do. We have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to do through the technology that would prevail. That is not how the conversation plays out anymore. The reality is all of that technology is viable. All of that technology is being used by someone out there, potentially in our space, potentially not. The question has to start with what you want to do internally and leverage that technology to deliver. But it's not just your product, people, and your business people that need to be around the table for this conversation because of this, possibly my absolutely favorite comic in describing how banks have tried to move with the time in this digital world. Because when I say that the last 15 years have been the sort of years of optionality, I don't for a moment mean that decisions haven't been made. Decisions have been made. Investment has been made. Experiments have gone ahead. Businesses are digitizing. But as we have gone down the path of what's the smallest piece of this I can engage with, and constantly discovering that the small piece actually is much bigger than we had originally anticipated. We have started from the glass, from the digital experience, from the visible digital offering. And as we're pushing down our organization, we got to the very unsexy plumbing, the place where a lot of thought and a lot of creativity and a lot of money potentially has to go to create digital infrastructure for the bank that wouldn't be very visible. The return on investment will be potentially hard to justify, and it didn't seem very exciting, so we left it as long as possible. And this happens. And if you tell me that your organization doesn't have this possibility and the dangers that go with it somewhere within it, frankly, I'll probably not believe you, but I'd love to have this conversation. So it's time to make choices, and it's time to make hard choices, because it's not about whether we should have an app anymore. It's not a choice about whether we should have digital channels. It is not about investing in UX. These were the easy choices. They didn't feel easy at the time, but actually with hindsight, they were the easy choices. Now we need to make some fundamental choices about what the organizations need to look like, all the way down in terms of investment in core infrastructure, the really unsexy stuff that nobody really wants to talk about, that determines the options that you're going to have tomorrow as new technology keeps coming, as new regulation keeps coming, and as your customers continue becoming savvier and savvier by the day. What happens next? Well, what happens next is that the thing that we have tried to avoid thinking about, hoping that one of the other turtles would give the answer, is now absolutely front and center of the decisions we need to make. Infrastructure is the thing we need to be talking about. The rails that both each individual financial institution and the industry is moving on, the unexciting, the boring utility stuff has to be turtles all the way down to support an era of higher expectation and increasingly different economics. And those of you who've seen some of the names who are with us today, those of you who've been on this journey long enough know that one of the biggest challenges we have had to date is to square our traditional economic models, the way of making money, with the increasing expectations, cost of doing business, and lighter touch ways of delivering services. That tension is only going to get worse. So we need to revamp our infrastructure so we can actually leave some of our legacy costs behind and really play into this new era with different economics. And once we've done all of that hard work, and it is going to be hard work, there is a hard discussion about brand permission, because the avoidance of some of these choices has damaged the way that some of the more mature players, your consumers and your customers out there, are seeing the traditional FIs, where they're going, well, you know, how do I trust that you will do the right thing when you haven't done it in the last 15 years? Now, if this didn't sound bad enough, there's actually one more catch. I did say it's about survival, but not about innovation. And the reality is it's a little bit about both, but it is not about both as separate departments doing something on the outskirts of your organization. This is about the step change of doing all these digital things as another thing that we needed to do, and coming to the realization that it's actually the way we do business now. It is not a channel, it is not a product, it is not a department that is looking at digitization. It is actually a radically different way of delivering the service to the customer in a way that they're happy to consume it. The infrastructure is actually a hygiene factor. It's not the differentiator that will make you the winner in this game, but it is the hygiene factor that will continue the ability to play in this game. The battle will continue to be fought around the business proposition, but without that, the plumbing upgrade, that battle will just sail away, because the organization will topple with that little thing that the dude in Nebraska has been has been upgrading. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your challenges. But as a parting thought, before I pause and let you jump in with your questions, is that if you knew all of that, if you suspected all of that, if you're already working on all of that, for me, the most important question is not what technology will you invest in next. It's not what your business strategy. I suspect you know the answer to both of those things already. My question is, do you know who your rogue plumbers are in your organization? Do you know who the people are who have the vision and the hunger to fix it all the way down, to increase its stability, to increase the hygiene factor that nobody knows, but they know it will be the key to survival as this technological avalanche of creativity and innovation from the outside keeps coming into your organization? They know how to make you more likely to survive with the unglamorous work of plumbing. If you know who your organization's rogue plumbers are, you have the highest degree of success in this game. If you don't know, I'd say it's an interesting exercise to find them. And if you can't find them, hire some. Thank you very much for your time. I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts now.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Lida. We've got quite a few, quite a few comments and questions. Just before we get cracking, what is 10 Times' role in the plumbing? And
oh, we are absolutely plumbers. We are plumbers. We are creating a cloud-native core banking system in the belief that the utility part of the rails should be exactly that: ubiquitous, scalable, flexible, and available, so that the banks could focus on creating their value-added propositions on top of it. So obviously, the company has been created by a former banker who said, I wanted to solve the problems I suffered from when I was on the other side of the table.
Bob McDowell makes a really interesting point. Does the velocity of change inhibit rational selection of options? And in consequence, do financial institutions just have to go with the flow?
I think that's a very, very sensible question. And the answer is inevitably. And I do think that we wasted a lot of time believing that we didn't have to go with the flow and that we would control the pace and time. And he's absolutely right that the realization that that's not the case, and we have to some extent, go with the flow and learn from it. It's absolutely there. I also agree with the implication that you can't understand everything, you can't learn everything, there's not enough time, but you have a business to run. And the ecosystem and the hygiene factors and the climate in which you're doing it is changing. You have to go with the flow to the extent that you don't believe you control it anymore, but you have to make some choices. And the distance between I have all the choices and rabbit in headlight was crossed extremely quickly, and we need to come back a bit. We need to come back not to a place where we think we control this narrative, because we absolutely don't, but to make choices within this flow that we absolutely have to go with.
We've got an interesting point here from Dan Feeney. Why have incumbent banks been so slow to choose a cloud-native, mobile-first strategy?
Hi, Dan. The answer to that is a little bit of everything I have flagged already. If you asked them at the time, they would probably have told you they're doing it. But they were doing it in a way that suggested that they didn't understand the timelines in which this would be required. They expected that they would be in more control of what, when, why, and how. Then on top of it, two things that I think are super important that I didn't mention is that the unwillingness to invest in brand new plumbing is why your high street bank offers very different functionality on the mobile and the website. It's invisible. Most consumers don't think too much in terms of the capability in front of them. And the bank didn't really want to burn all the cash of going all the way down and all the way across. So doing the thing that would be most visible, most shiny, most meaningful without touching the plumbing has been a conscious decision for a long time. And I think the third piece is a lack of imagination. The view from your desk is compelling. And as this world started changing with the best intentions in the world, a lot of people tried to digitize what they saw around them and disrupt the day-to-day business the least they could, which is an understandable urge. And until there were some challengers in the mix showing us what good looked like, I don't think there were necessarily people inside the banks who could imagine it.
Rob Wilmot points out that there have been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the banking and financial sectors over the past 15 years. And his question is the compounding of inherited legacy systems and the associated claim that there's been a lack of integration and institutional memory, is this a myth or a reality in your opinion?
There's obviously every experience has its uniqueness, right? I have seen organizations take the opportunity of a big merger to slash through some of that legacy. And I've seen organizations do it terribly and end up with the most convoluted estates. I haven't seen anyone start with bad intentions, and that's why I hesitated. Nobody starts with bad intentions. There's always a very compelling reason, regulatory stability, continued service, that people choose to go the way they choose to go to. But I've worked in organizations that had 17 instances of the same piece of software because the relative cost of cleaning out the mess versus the urgent requirements somewhere else in the organization meant that it was a decision that was constantly kicked down the can. And the reality of having to balance those decisions is always complicated, and everyone feels that their decisions are unique, and you know, everyone feels they're a snowflake. Every time I see a big legacy organization coming together with another big legacy organization, I groan inwardly a little bit, because you will inevitably end up with a little bit of spaghetti, because we don't always know how systems are used. We know what they were designed for, but users, as you well know, are weird and wily creatures. I do remember working in an organization a few years ago. We grandfathered a system. It had been socialized to all the users that this system was coming to the end of its life. What we didn't know was that there was a bunch of people who had view of the system. They weren't editors, and as far as we were concerned, they weren't users, but they were leveraging the information in that system to inform some pretty significant upstream activity. And they were really unhappy with me because I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time representing this piece of work. Does the merger represent an opportunity to say we will create a go-forward infrastructure? Yes. Have we seen anyone do it as boldly as that? No. Would it be expensive and time-consuming to do it? Yes. And there's no quick fix to this. So I want to be empathetic and sympathetic, because this is not easy. We've done the easy stuff.
You know, it's interesting. I'd be kind of curious how bad you really think the plumbing is, because Hugh Purser says it sounds like the ego-driven leadership of the past may be on borrowed time. Or is that too hopeful?
I want to come in defense of bankers for a second. I don't deny for a moment that there is a lot of that. There's a lot of ego-driven leadership, but there's also a lot of knowing what you know, right? People were promoted on the basis of skills and behaviors, and all of a sudden we're telling them that your skills and behaviors are super valuable in maintaining the business now, but you need a whole host of new skills and behaviors at the same time to transform the business. It's an impossible task in many ways, and some of the best intentions lead us to the wrong places. I do believe that the choices being made now are very, very important. I worked with a number of banks over the last few months. COVID has been a very interesting inflection point, because it removed some choices, particularly for banks that had an inadequate estate for their own teams to operate. If you didn't have enough investment in your plumbing so that people could work from home, you were presented with no choice but to do something about it. But I did have this conversation with actually 3 different banks in 3 different geographies, who were saying that when their respective governments came out and said there should be a mortgage holiday, they had 2 choices: to throw people at the problem or to rethink their infrastructure. It would probably take the same amount of time, but not the same amount of the same people's time. So to get a bunch of COBOL engineers out of retirement, and I'm not exaggerating here, was an easier political decision to make, to keep the executives focused on the corporate loan book that was creaking because of COVID, on solutions for clients, on looking after teams. I don't want to underestimate for a second how difficult these decisions are, but to the point raised, whether it's ego or not, we are on borrowed time, because the pace of change around the banking institutions has been much faster than the pace of change within them. And the maturity of the market and the regulator means that the bar keeps rising. And we've left the harder stuff. I don't want to say last, because the journey doesn't end, but we've left the harder stuff. We've done the easier bits, and they didn't feel easy.
Okay. I had a few questions down myself I wanted to ask you. One of them was really, in many other sectors, and this technology that we're talking about is IT. In many other sectors, people give a lot more back. You know, there's an entire shareware movement. Industries, banks have been traditionally very selfish. In fact, I can tell you an amusing story once where a very large investment bank hauled me in, having just spent $8 million on a website, purely a publish-only website in '99, and they were shocked that people could actually see all of their HTML code. And I tried to explain to them that's how the system works.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is it, but we want to copyright it. How can we, you know, other people can't take it. So Dan Feeney asked a really good question. Why does Plaid, you know, this open source movement, scare incumbent banks like PNC who've launched some litigation against them?
That's a very good question. I will not comment specifically on PNC because that's not fair. But I would say Plaid scared the banks at first because they couldn't understand the business model. I remember having this conversation with a lot of banking colleagues at the time, and I felt I was doing a terrible job explaining what Plaid does. But it was from a business model perspective, it was offering a service that was too far removed from how the bank still perceived value creation. Without getting too theoretical, there was a massive leap. And what Plaid taught us is that it didn't need the banks to understand it for the market to exist and grow, and for the banks to benefit from that thing they didn't understand in a time frame that made them really uncomfortable. So I think there's discomfort in this thing that came in a way that was confusing, and this thing becoming extremely valuable to us as well. It's not like it's valuable over there. It's valuable to the people who couldn't understand it. So I think Plaid is a very good example of a series of businesses that occupy a space that is invisible and yet super valuable. And if you look at what digital transformation and innovation has looked like for most banks so far, it has been about high visibility, low cost, low integration. High visibility because you needed to convince your stakeholders that you're actually doing something, and you need to convince yourself. Low cost because it was always discretionary budgets, because lights on is so expensive, understandable. And low integration exactly because we didn't have a Plaid, and our own systems underneath were not able to do real-time connectivity. They weren't able to do real-time connectivity in a way that was secure and left us competent. So we concentrated our efforts in things that were visible and completely missed a trick in the place that was invisible, plumbing, where genuinely creative ideas such as Plaid. Now you think, well, why didn't I think of that? We didn't think of that because it didn't exist and we didn't know we had a need for it. So without commenting specifically on PNC, I do think that creation of such a lucrative business model in a way that no bank could have thought of is a little bit scary.
Well, let's take it from another perspective. You know, you had that lovely XKCD slide of the infrastructure. Always a fan of XKCD, but coming from an IT perspective, what he's pointing out is the hidden Tuttles that keep the whole thing working, and on which the banks depend enormously, even if they don't fund them or pay for them. This is almost in contrast. Dimitris Futouris wonders, does the necessity for infrastructure to stay in the game imply that smaller and less sophisticated banks will not be able to compete And would that mean that only external cloud services would be a way out?
Yeah, a very good question. We don't know, right? There's an opportunity for smaller players to leapfrog, to actually very creatively and very aggressively think about the really differentiating value additive piece of their business, and create a business logic layer and outsource everything underneath it. Create and the possibility to do that and lower your operational costs and be truly, truly competitive and make it someone else's problem. The opportunity is there. Is your decision-making capability in the boardroom ready for that? That's the big question. And I think we will see a massive differentiator in terms of the leadership organizations have, not in terms of their reach. Ultimately, this is absolutely non-differentiating, but it's hygiene. So it's existential. If you don't have the right infrastructure, you will not be able to be compliant or competitive. Having that infrastructure doesn't make you competitive, though. The creativity on the business side does. So for me, the smaller players have a unique opportunity to leapfrog, ditch their infrastructure. Most of them don't have a lot of homegrown systems that they're emotionally attached to. So you can leapfrog, provided you have the courage in your boardroom to make some pretty unusual decisions for the type of risk profile and decision you've made before.
Bob McDowell again, is there a shortage of plumbers? Who wants to be a Tuttle plumber? What are its rewards?
It's such a good question, and there is a shortage of plumbers.
Could you just expand a little bit about what you think a plumber is? How would I know a plumber if I saw one?
You know them, Michael. You've been collecting plumbers. I would define a plumber. Well, let me define a plumber first, and then let me define a Tuttle, because they're a little different. A plumber is someone who can understand how to make the thing work in all the ways that are invisible. So, for instance, it is very reassuring for me to see banks setting up SRE departments. Up until very recently, a big bank would not have a site reliability engineer as a job description. The fact that they now understand that there is a DevOps is extremely important, SRE is extremely important as a discipline, that to me is very reassuring, because you're seeing that organizations slowly but surely are realizing that there's a whole host of stuff that lives under the apps that is required for the apps to operate the way they should. So those guys are plumbers. But what's your Tuttle? Your Tuttle is someone who can take you from where you are today to where you are tomorrow, where you need to be tomorrow, without setting the building on fire. Because none of us have the luxury of stopping earning, stopping servicing our existing clients, or honoring our regulatory responsibilities. We have to change the ship while we're in it, and we've wasted precious time. And we don't have unlimited budgets. I mean, I can fix this for you if you can give me an empty check, right? But that's not how it operates. So people who can understand how to make things stable, who do the invisible work, these are your plumbers. Hire them if you don't have them. But the people who have the understanding of what that needs to look like, but enough empathy for the business model and enough understanding for your legacy to carve a path that won't always be comfortable, and we'll cut a few corners here and there, but we'll get you there. They're your Tuttles, and you definitely need them for the journey.
Well, sadly, we've come to the end of time. Hugh Purser summarized that pithily: engineers versus scientists versus rocket scientists. Sorry, engineers versus physicists versus rocket scientists. Very good, Hugh. Thank you. Sadly, we have come to the end of time, and comments are coming in thanking you. You said that the era of optionality, is over, and I do hope that, although you did sort of put together survival as a goal, I'd like to see more people thriving in this space. It ought to be fun and exciting, and I sometimes wonder about the entire sector and it's almost its incestuous nature as it tries to do this, when many other industries, not all, but many other industries, do seem to change and do seem to find their inner Tuttles. So I'll leave it at that, if I may. I've got 3 quick rounds of thanks, if I may. The first one is to our sponsors. Thank you very much. I hope that today was pretty much right up the street: technology, economics, finance, and fixing the infrastructure that it relies upon. I'd also like to thank you, the audience. Been very good today. Very nice. And as ever, I won't go through the events that are ahead. Merely go to the website and check them out. And Lida, very, very kind of you to take the time and the preparation for today and to share with us your thoughts, especially as you're living the dream. I don't know. You're living the
I'm
plumbing.
living my best Tuttle life.
That's it. Unfortunately, in these days of COVID, I'm unable to open the floodgates of applause that would otherwise be there. I will send you all the nice comments, though. But may I offer you, if anything else, an ersatz applause with my karmic Korean clapper. And that's what the audience would have done, I'm sure. And we look forward to hearing a lot more about you and your organization as it navigates this entire network of piping. So thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.